Hey, hey. Welcome to video note number 2. This is going to be a quick one because, for the most part, this information is pretty straightforward. I hesitate to use the concept of common sense simply just because much of what psychology ends up doing within the field is to throw common sense on its head. However, I will say that this is pretty straightforward and easy to follow. So I'd prefer to use that phraseology rather than common sense simply just because oftentimes when we attempt to think critically, we evaluate what is deemed to be common sense and find it wanting or lacking. So, things that you should look for when you are thinking critically, because at the end of the day, what thinking critically is simply just evaluating and analyzing something rather than just blindly accepting it to be true. Okay? There are things that can torpedo critical thinking, and one of the most common things out there is intuition, that we have this tendency toward what we call a hindsight bias, which is lovingly referred to as I knew it all along syndrome, right? When we often learn about something or hear something and it seems familiar, we have this preconditioning thing happening where we just kind of veer right toward thinking that we knew that to be true well before it was ever actually confirmed for us. Research often ends up inspiring and overturning popular ideas out there that are seen as common sense. So, for example, never give toddlers sugar before bedtime. Fun fact, sugar does not increase hyperactivity. And we know this because of research that's been done within the field of psychology to try to think critically about things rather than just looking at something for common sense, right? But a really good example of hindsight bias of the I knew it all along syndrome is an example of where you are not a big fan of your best friend's significant other. You think that they are pretty sketchy and they're not treating your best friend the way that they should. Come to find out, best friend comes to you after they've been dating for several months and they say, hey, so and so is cheating on me. And your initial response in your head is like, I knew it. I knew they weren't good for you. I knew this would happen. I knew they didn't care about you, right? And you have to like hold back the whole like I was right kind of mentality. Okay, it's really easy to fall prey to the hindsight bias, but the reality is you didn't actually legitimately know 100% scientifically at that point when your friend was dating their significant other that they were kind of a jerk. You had an intuition, but you can't just blindly accept an intuition as being fact. You have to think far more critically. Okay? Overconfidence is another issue. When we think we know more than we do, right? I've cautioned against this for students who have taken intro to psych. They have a perception when they come in that this course will be so much easier for them because they've gotten at least a baseline introduction to what the content is that we are learning. But the reality is virtually half of this class has never been taught in one of our intro courses. So those kids have no idea what we're covering when it gets to some of the latter units of this class. And so you have to be really careful that you don't just think that you know an awful lot more than you do. This is also something that we're going to really push you toward not falling prey to when it comes to your studying skills. We've already started to try to attack some of those with your welcome stations, but what we really want you to look at and recognize is that once we find the real answer, that our initial response to it was okay or right, when in actuality it just almost doesn't really count. Like we need it to be truly legitimately full-fledged scientific in that regard. Things to watch for are things like pseudoscience. So psychics, astrology, what's your sign, that kind of stuff. Those popular beliefs can seem to be related to science, but the reality is they're not. They're not scientifically backed. They are not used via a scientific method. And so we caution against the use of those things. A lot of times you'll see, in particular, astrology as a signaler for personality traits. But again, you gotta avoid kind of the picking and choosing of a confirmation bias as well, of thinking that once, if you're a Pisces and they say like this is what your horoscope is, you can't just be like, oh yeah, that's so me, that's so me, that's so me, that's so me. They're not using any science to base that off of, so you have to be very careful about those things. Pseudoscience ain't true science because pseudo means false or fake. So then how do you overcome pitfalls? You got to have a scientific attitude. And this is where things are going to come into play as we move forward. We're going to be challenging an awful lot of beliefs that you've held for a very long period of time, i.e., the typical way that you can play school and be successful. When we talk about a scientific attitude, what we want you to do is be curious, be passionate. Are you in this course because you just want to try to earn the course credit for college and not have to take the class again? Or are you here because you genuinely have interest in psychology? If it's the former, class is going to be a beast. It's going to be a bear. But if you're interested and you find this content to be engaging, that's awesome. We want you to have that curiosity. We also want you to have some healthy skepticism. Ask questions. Something that you will hear me say over and over and over again is you are more than allowed to ask the method to my madness. Hopefully I demonstrated to you guys through our welcome stations why I do everything that I do and structure it the way that I do. But for some people, it might not connect for them in that regard. So then in that case, like, yeah, ask me. You don't have to blindly accept that what I'm doing has a purpose. If you don't see it, ask about it. And finally, within the field, we need to have some humility. Sometimes we end up refuting our own ideas or coming into evidence that conflicts with what our original hypothesis is, and we have to be accepting of that in order to make sure that what we're doing is truly scientifically backed and assessed critically. So when we try to process claims and make judgments based on well-supported evidence, that's when we're thinking critically, okay? You can look at it as asking 5 overarching questions. What am I being asked to believe or accept? What evidence is there to support that assertion? Are there any alternative ways to interpret what's being presented to me? What additional evidence could there be to help further evaluate some of those alternatives? And then at the end of the day, what are the conclusions that are most reasonable? This seems like a pretty easy thing to do, but keep in mind that whole issue coming back here with the humility piece. Oftentimes kids are going to be presented with information in this course that challenges a lot of their pre-held beliefs, and they struggle to be able to recognize that the evidence that's being presented in front of them is challenging an awful lot of what they hold to be true in their lives. The way that we go about carrying out critical thought is using the scientific method, okay? So talking theories and hypotheses. Kind of dry and boring, but it's important nonetheless, okay? Theories are testable explanations. They are not just a speculation or a guess, okay? The main goal within psychological science is to develop theories. So that way they can be applicable across the board and they have solid empirical or experience-based evidence to support them. Yes, hypotheses are, theories in their infantile stages. They're testable predictions. They're implied by a theory, but they enable us to revise things or give predictions based off of certain directions that our research are going to go. And it's very critical that you keep in mind this thing called an operational definition. You'll hear it referenced again in experimental methods. You have to have parameters for exactly how you intend to establish your variables. You have to make it so that way they are quantifiable and measurable. So that way somebody isn't attempting to replicate your research and doing it wrong. Because then if that's the case, it's not going to be good. So replication is critical for success in determining a theory because a theory has gone through multiple rounds of testing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to get to a point where we can say, okay, you know what, this is pretty solid. This is our best understanding of how people behave and think. And so much of what you're going to be presented with in this course is theory-oriented, not just hypothesis-oriented. So that's the end of your Thinking Critically video notes. Let me know if you got any questions, per usual.